as people file in. We found that in these sessions, we had a really high number of registrations, but it tends to take a couple minutes before everybody finds their way into the room. So we'll just wait patiently. No fish yet. Sorry.
Will this be recorded?
Yes, we are going to be recording this session, and this should be available on the DOE site
Perfect.
in the next few days. So if you've missed any of the previous sessions, those will be up.
Yeah, I was thinking more of sharing with my department. So.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
And we'll, the people that have registered for this will send out a document with the PowerPoint. There are some embedded links and stuff in here, so don't feel like you have to scramble and write everything down and all of that. So we'll be sending that along in the next few days as well. So anytime you want to refer back to this, then we'll have it. And you can certainly share those with people in your school or departments. All right, it is 11:03. We've still got some people coming into the waiting room. But I think we're gonna get going. So I will introduce myself. I'm John Graham. I'm the Elementary Digital Learning Specialist here at the Department of Education. And I will let my secondary counterpart, Emma, introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma Banks. I'm the Secondary Digital Learning and Computer Science Specialist at the Department of Ed.
So for today, we're going to be tackling one of my favorite topics. This is one of the pieces of the second module that I was most excited about doing, was to be talking about selecting and integrating technology tools, because I think that's always a fun thing to do. I think people that are into technology and trying new things out, it's a really fun kind of process to go through. I think other people, it's a little bit more nerve-wracking. So we're going to try to give you some guidance and mechanisms to be looking at. So this is part 1 of the module 2 of the remote learning series. All right, so instructional models for remote learning. We're going to be moving on to Emma, did we jump backwards on the slideshow?
Thank you. I'm like sitting here so confused for a minute. It's because we have a massive slide deck and this is from yesterday. So if it looks familiar to anybody who was here yesterday, that is why. I was sitting here like, that does not seem like what we were going to talk about today. This should look a little better, John.
There we go. So this is kind of the process in terms of what I was thinking what we'd cover for this topic today. So we're going to talk about selecting apps. So part of that is, I think, sometimes thinking about the need that directs you to the app. Sometimes it's maybe you have an app and that you maybe want to use that you like, and sometimes it's, finding where is the place that you can be using that. Then the integrating piece of it is literally from rolling out whatever the tool is that you're using with students to whatever final point you want to get to. And then I think the important part that sometimes we don't always take time to do is to actually evaluate the integration of whatever technology that you're using. I did want to kind of say, because Emma and I were kind of talking about how to maybe think about this process, and I would liken it to the experience of going to a restaurant. So you have the deciding on what it is that you want to eat. Maybe you have a specific cuisine you want to eat or a place that you want to go that has a restaurant. So you kind of have all of those factors that play into selecting which restaurant you want to go to. the integrating is really the big thing. That's going to the restaurant and parking and ordering your meal and the whole experience of all of it. And then the evaluating, anybody that goes to a restaurant, you're going to leave thinking like, oh, that was good. Oh, that wasn't so good. I don't think we'll go back, or that was definitely worth the money that we spent, whatever the case may be. I think everybody does that evaluating piece in their head. So it is important to, I think, go through that process and, be really honest with the evaluation piece at the end. So moving along so we're going to be focusing on selecting and integrating technology tools. And we've got a little video that kind of gives a nice overview of the process and kind of thinking behind technology integration.
One second. I'm realizing that I did not share my computer sound, so I'm going to fix that before I play it and you don't hear it.
Oh, well done.
Okay, so we should be good now.
People have been integrating technology in the classroom forever. What I think is really exciting about what we're seeing now is that technology is being used to fundamentally transform what the classroom is, fundamentally transform what you can do with the classroom.
I think to define technology integration, it's really using whatever resources you have to the best of your abilities. Technology, it's a tool. It's what you do with that tool, what you can make, what you allow the students to make. That's really what technology is about. If you can do this lesson without technology, that's great. But if you can do it better with technology, then that's why you use it. That's why you use tools.
This is a list of different applications that you can use to make music or do art. I've used it to record some of my personal narratives that I've written.
My eyes were drooping. I was drifting off to sleep.
Students today are creating using digital tools. They're not creating using analog tools. For us to feel like we really are connecting with our kids and to make learning fun for our kids and meaningful, we need to meet them where they are. Kids can create podcasts, movies, songs to express their ideas, express their thoughts, but also to express their learning.
When you create, you take ownership of your learning. You understand it in a very different way than if you just memorized something from a textbook, or if you just read it over and over again, or watched it in someone else's film. If you were able to translate that information into your own film, your own content, your own something to share, that's just amazing.
And sometimes they learn things we didn't expect them to learn. Like I had my second graders reflect on the project they did, and some of them said, I learned how to get along with somebody, or I learned how to work with somebody. This internet thing that has become a big part of our lives, it's really enabled people around the world to connect in ways we never imagined.
People always say that the kids respond better when they're able to share their work. Well, of course, because they have a valid audience. It doesn't go into a pile on the teacher's desk and they get handed back to their folder. Kids today can create stuff and share it with the entire world. And they have that authentic audience. They have people that actually not only will read it, but also care about it.
We have to make a movie project, so you you have a topic, and with your topic you speak into a microphone, and then you draw pictures to go with what you're saying.
If they have the link to our website, which they might end up getting by searching something on Google, and then this might pop up. And so yeah, there is a chance of kids around the world, getting to see these videos.
The traditional academic model that we've inherited from the Prussians 200 years ago is we have a set amount of time to learn something, and then there's an exam. You get a B, I get a C, even though the exam identified that you have some basic weaknesses, I have even more weaknesses, we'll then move on to the next concept. So instead of doing that traditional everyone move together in lockstep model, with technology you have the potential to everyone learn at their own pace and master concepts before they move on. Have the teacher get real-time dashboards to see who's stuck on what. Something like that is a fundamental transformation of what a classroom is.
role of the teacher has shifted. I'm truly seeing a world where the person who's in the role of teacher is really a facilitator. And if you can facilitate your students to create great work and work alongside with them to do that, that's amazing to me.
It's not about the mode of creation, it's not about the tool, it's about the learning, it's about the process, it's about the look on my students' faces, the fact that they can stay focused, motivated, engaged, and they're sharing ideas really makes learning joyful.
All right, so hopefully that kind of gives you kind of an overview of when we're talking about technology integration, kind of what we're getting at, what we're looking at. I think there are kind of two common models that, and I don't know, I have a slide for this, but I think there are kind of two common models when we're thinking about technology that we're using. And sometimes it might be technology that you're using day in and day out, whether that's email or if you use Google Docs in your classroom. There are a lot of those tools that reach a point that students, if they're using them year after year, they become pretty, seamless in their use of them. So there are those tools, but then I'm kind of focusing more on if you're trying to adapt and pull in something new that they haven't used before. So hopefully that kind of will frame the whole selection process of it. So I have these 6 areas that I'm going to focus on. So checking for compliance, critical support, checking for red flags, creator credibility, choice mechanisms, and then the 4 C's, as if there aren't enough C's in the previous 5. So moving on to the first one, checking for compliance is really important. So there are these are kind of the 3 big things to be thinking about. And I included what the name of them. Sometimes we just kind of say the 3 of them, FERPA, COPA, and SIPA. We just kind of say them out. But when you're looking at new technology, it's really important to look over what tool it is that you're using and make sure that they're compliant. They should have a web presence that you can access, and they should have some information about their privacy policies and things like that. So I did include Book Creator on here is kind of an example because they've got a nice privacy policy page. So we can go to that. Take a look at how it sees. And a lot of times they'll have actual like badges that can show up. And certain states have kind of their own in-state policies. So you might see some of those as well. I think California is kind of the big one. So if we just scroll down through this, if you were kind of going through the vetting process, you can see right on the left there that it's compliant with FERPA. FERPA and COPA are kind of the big ones. SIPA kind of plays in there once in a while. It's a little bit different in terms of what you're using with students. A lot of times that kind of plays more into social media and things like that. So just, that shouldn't be a red flag if you don't see all 3 of those. But I think FERPA and COPA are kind of the big ones that you want to be looking for. Moving along to the next one about critical support. So as somebody that worked in in an IT capacity within a school district, I think some of these questions that I have on here are very common questions that I would have if a staff member was coming to me wanting to roll out a new piece of technology. Maybe they found an app on their iPad and they think students would like it. So these would be the kind of the immediate questions. So if you're going to need to get approval from your tech department, or you're going to be working with them, which I would strongly suggest trying to work with them because they're going to be able to help support you, but it's tough to support you if you don't know that the technology is out there and being used. And then administrators, obviously that, can vary widely based on different schools and school districts in terms of how engaged they might be with the technology, approving technology being used or just knowing what's being used. So that's kind of another consideration to be making as well. But these 4 questions: how much does it cost? So a lot of tools you can use for free, but there's a paywall. And just because something isn't free doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but that is a consideration to be making if you're looking at something early on. Are the students going to need accounts set up? So that does kind of play into the FERPA piece there in terms of what is the whole process of creating accounts and populating those accounts. That ties in with the one on the bottom left. Will it work with our current systems? So if you are a Google Apps for Education school, a lot of times you can migrate students out to third-party apps really easily. I've had people on calls earlier that have said that really makes a big difference because you don't have all of these different accounts and passwords that students need to try to remember, or people in the tech department need to keep track of. So it just makes it easier if you can use your systems that are already in place to kind of populate those accounts. And then the one in the bottom right, what's required for pushing it out. So if you have an app on, say, an iPad, there's usually a process for pushing those out and making them available on the device. If you're installing it on a computer, or if you have a computer lab and you're needing to install it on desktops and get things set up, all of those parts, they're really important to know, because if you want to roll something out successfully, you want to make sure that you get all those things moving along before it's time to actually use whatever the piece of technology is. So I think that's really important, that you work with your tech departments, work with your administration if you're looking to roll out some new technology. Moving along to the next one. So some of the red flags that you might see. So when you're getting on a new piece of technology and looking through, these are a few things. I'm not going to say that if you see any one of these, that should be kind of like, oh, I can't use this. But I think if you see enough of these, they should be kind of things that in your head trigger like, I got to think about this one carefully. Advertisements is a big one. If you are using an app and there are a lot of advertisements that pop up in it, sometimes that can be, kind of questionable. I know, like with YouTube videos and certain websites, people are looking for tools that can kind of block out all of those advertisements that come in, because it's kind of just extra noise and distraction. Some apps have in-app purchases, so they might seem like they have good functionality, but really you've got to make some purchases to get kind of the full thing. So it's just something to be aware of if they're set up that way. So if an app is free, that's not always a bad thing. I think sometimes if an app is free, it can be, an indicator that, maybe this is part of a larger company and this is just an app that they have available for free. It can be kind of tough to know what a company's business model is and how they roll out apps that are free. Other times it might be kind of one of those things like, maybe this is free because it's not really that awesome, and just like there was kind of just a small developer or something like that just kind of created that. And I've definitely seen teachers that have used, something like a QR code reader, that they were using it for a little while and then it broke because it was free and it was just a small developer had kind of put together this QR code reader. Limited functionality. I think if you have an app that there isn't really a lot that you can do with it, if it's just very one specific task oriented, sometimes that's not always the best choice. You really want to be selective about the tools that you're pushing out to your students and expecting them to be using with some regularity, because if you have, it'd be better to, as we often say, keep it simple. It'd be better to have less apps than a ton of apps, and each of those individual apps might do something useful, but maybe there's one app that could do a bunch of different functions. lofty promises. If you're coming across something that's going to be kind of the silver bullet for your educational woes, I mean, to me, that's often something that I'll see companies kind of making those promises, and it's always troubling, because I mean, technology is more than just like that one tool that's going to fix everything for you. And if a company's saying that, it just always seems kind of suspect to me. Account management and system integration limitations. I think those two I kind of talked on the last one. You know, if you're working with your tech department, it's really nice if you can leverage your systems that you have in place to manage student accounts if you have them, or use other systems to populate those apps. And then the last one is, if they don't have a lot of resources available, you know, if there aren't a lot of even like videos on YouTube that are kind of like showing different tools that you know might be looking up, if you're not seeing people talking about them, or if they don't offer their own PD or something like that, well, maybe it's going to be difficult to support that, or kind of support yourself in learning about that app. So these are kind of some considerations. I don't think any one of these is a deal breaker in any way, but I think kind of look through these, kind of digest. So if you're looking at something brand new, that's just kind of one of the parts. You want to look for what are the positives, what are the things that an app has going for it, and then you might have, you know, some negatives that you need to take into consideration. All right, and moving along to creator credibility. So another thing that's really important is, if you're looking at an app, is looking at the developer, who's behind this, and try to get some backstory on that. There are a lot of fantastic apps that it's that company, really that one app is like the one thing that they do. A lot of apps out there that are great are actually owned by other companies. So this is an example. So maybe in the chat, if anybody knows what this logo of this particular app is, why don't you enter it in the chat, and we'll see who's the first one to get there. Oh, a whole bunch of people. So iMovie that's what this app is. So iMovie is really popular. You can use it on a variety of different devices. If I say what the devices are, that might give away the next part. Is, who is the developer of iMovie? Yes, so Apple develops, you know, is the developer behind iMovie. So one of the things that's nice about that is, you know, iMovie is not going to just like up and vanish someday, because Apple, you know, moved on to other things, and they just don't have developers. They have like a team of people that take care and provide support around that specific tool. So that's always the consideration to be making, is if you know there's a big company behind a particular app, that can be a really good indicator that it's going to have a lot of support. And I mean, we're lucky in Maine that we have Apple specialists right within the state that could come to your school and provide support around iMovie specifically. So that only exists because Apple is a large company that can provide that infrastructure. So moving along to the next slide, I have a little game. Yes, so iMovie is developed by Apple. So I want you guys to take a second, and we're going to look at these 5 different apps. So each of these apps is owned by a kind of larger company. Either they're a subsidiary of a larger company, or they are owned by a larger kind of company or organization. So I'm going to have you, before we go through and everybody start saying in the chat, I want people to, we'll start with number 1. If you think you know what number 1, which is the app Flipgrid, if you think you know who owns it, then put that answer in there. Very good. So those who are not on the chat, people are putting Microsoft, because yes, Microsoft is the company behind Flipgrid. So they acquired Flipgrid a few years ago. So that's a really good indicator that Flipgrid is not going away, and it is free and freely available. So that's fantastic. And Microsoft is the company behind that. So the next one, YouTube. So YouTube is its own company, but is a subsidiary of a larger company. And I'm seeing that a lot of people know that that's Google. So same thing. So, you know, YouTube is going to have pretty robust support being part of the Google or Alphabet organization. The next one, Soundtrap. Soundtrap was acquired a few years ago by a larger company. Does anybody know what that company is? Oh, someone got it. So Soundtrap, just because I saw some people are like, I never heard of that. So Soundtrap is a, if you've ever used GarageBand, it's kind of a recording tool, but it's web-based, which is fantastic. So you can use it across platforms. But it was acquired a few years ago by Spotify. So that was an interesting acquisition by them, and it's fantastic because they now have that stability, and Spotify's really supported them in terms of like building out their Soundtrap EDU infrastructure, which is really awesome. The next one is Spark. I saw somebody put that out there. So Spark is under the Adobe suite of tools. So Adobe produces tons of fantastic products, and Spark is one, and it's freely available, and it's a really nice app that you can use across platforms because it is web-based. So definitely something to consider using, and it's, again, it's part of Adobe, so it's not going to probably vanish at any point in the near future. And then the last one is, so Spark is kind of a, it's kind of a video slideshow creation tool. Yeah, you could use Spark for young kids. It's very drag and drop. I think if you're using, especially like an iPad, I think it works pretty well. I don't know if anybody in here has used it for grade 1 before, but yes, I think you probably could use it with some appropriate training. All right, and our last one is Scratch. Does anybody know what larger organization owns Scratch? Oh, and everybody put in the right thing. MIT, so it's part of MIT's Media Lab. So that's kind of just an example of 5 apps that are out there that are kind of owned and developed and continued by larger companies. So I think that's a good example of, if you're thinking about, taking the plunge or pursuing an app, doing a little bit of homework and seeing how it's, who it's being developed by, who it's being supported by. So people had asked, what is Scratch? And Scratch is a block-based programming app. So they have Scratch and Scratch Junior that are available. So if you're working with really young kids, Scratch Junior works nicely. And for older kids or even younger kids, the traditional Scratch platform is really nice. Oh, are we just using PowerPoint for this presentation? Which PowerPoint, of course, Microsoft. So if you were using PowerPoint, then it's a good app to choose. Next thing to talk about is kind of different mechanisms for choosing apps. So Emma and I have been talking about, some of these tools a lot recently. This one, the pedagogy wheel, has been kind of updated and modified over and over again. So if you look in the middle of this, they're getting at Bloom's taxonomy. And on the outside, it's talking about the SAMR model, which we'll get into in a few minutes. But the kind of inner ring, just inside the outside, has all kinds of icons of different apps. And it does have their names, and this is linked, so when you get the slideshow, you can go to this. So this can be a helpful mechanism for trying to figure out what kind of app you want to use. And if you look at this, you might kind of think like, oh my gosh, there are like a bazillion apps here. How could I learn all of them? How could I know what's the best one? I think this kind of gives you some way of assessing based on your need. What is it that you want to do with this particular app or tool, and kind of working out. So this isn't just for iPads. A lot of these are web-based as well, although there are some that are specific to use. So this is the pedagogy wheel. So this can be kind of one useful mechanism if you're trying to decide on which tools to use if you want to work, especially working off of Bloom's. But there's more. So this is the periodic table of iPad apps. Mark Anderson has his information on there. He does these all the time. So every time there's like a big iOS update, and he's done these for different platforms. He's done like VR and AR. So just like a traditional periodic table, he has them kind of divided into different sections. So again, this can be a nice tool for trying to decide if you're looking for a tool, or if you're trying to fill a specific function with a tool. That can be something to use to help you kind of organize your thinking or direct your thinking. And I think we've got one last one. So this is kind of similar to that first one, but a little more streamlined in that it works off of Bloom's taxonomy with some different apps that you can use. So like the top row, if you had students, you wanted them to be creating something, there are a couple examples up there of things that you can use for creating. You can kind of read through. So these will be linked in the PowerPoint, and I mean, a lot of these they're widely available on the internet, so you could certainly just Google these and find them. But obviously getting a nice high resolution version to look at closely can be helpful. Moving along to the 4 C's. So if you're not familiar with the 4 C's, they are creativity, connection, context, and critical thinking. I think when you're selecting an app, it is very important that you consider apps that can, tick most of these boxes. And especially if you're getting kids started on an app that can transfer into other areas, it's nice to have those tools that you can use beyond just like one task or one class. So I think that's another consideration to be making. So thinking about the 4 C's, and if students can use whatever technology you're rolling out to them and with these things in mind, can be really useful. And I think that gets me through all of the 6 areas that I had wanted to go over in terms of the selection process. And then I will turn it over to Emma to talk about some different integration models.
Awesome. Yeah. So we wanted to provide you with just a couple of models for looking at technology integration. These are things that you may or may not be familiar with. There are some resources within this slide deck that we will email out. I'll be emailing this whole slide deck out to people. So feel free to check out some of these resources. We won't have time to really dig into them, but we still wanted to share these because they're really great ways to frame your thoughts around integrating technology. So the first one is SAMR. I think out of the 2, this will probably be the one that more people are familiar with. And this is just this idea of a ladder of technology integration. So you've got the substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. With the modification and redefinition being where the higher order thinking skills come into play and learning becomes more transformational. And so that can be a really great way to frame your thoughts about how you're using technology currently and how it might be used moving forward. One thing that I will emphasize, which seems to be a really important point that John and I keep coming back to with the SAMR model, is that not everything should be at the M and the R level, that some things are just fine where they are at substitution and augmentation. So if you find yourself struggling to try to level something up, then it may not be the right fit for it. So considering purpose behind the technology that you're using and trying to integrate can be crucial to kind of knowing where it belongs on the SAMR model. So I would encourage you to dig into that. This is a video, this first resource here is a really great, just quick video, kind of similar to the one that we showed about technology integration, just digs into SAMR and walks you through the process of like an activity that you might modify and move up the levels. So definitely feel free to check that out. The other one that we wanted to just share with you is the TPAC model. This is probably one that is less familiar to people. And this is kind of a model that focuses on the content knowledge that you have, the pedagogy knowledge that you have about how people learn, and then the technology knowledge that you have and how those kind of play together to build your strengths of your teaching toolkit, so to say. So just as an example, kind of quickly, you would have your technology knowledge and you'd have your content knowledge, and having both of those places of knowledge come together and intersect, you will be able to make more informed decisions about your technology integration because you're familiar with the content, you know how people digest it, you know how it needs to be delivered. So this is kind of the three strengths really playing off of each other. You know how people learn, you know your content, and then so how can you use those two to find tools and technology that will help you to reach your goals. Again, this is just a quick overview of these two models that if you're not familiar with them, we really encourage you to kind of dig into. This is the top one again is a video that kind of just walks you through TPAC and should help to clear up any confusion that you might be experiencing looking at this and being like, what on earth am I staring at? That video is really great, like walkthrough of it all. But again, in respect to everyone's time, we didn't want to just show you a bunch of videos about stuff. So we wanted to link to them, but kind of just give you a quick overview. And so some considerations to be making when you are integrating technology would be to leave yourself time to roll out. So if you need to demonstrate how to use the tool, if you're trying to test it out yourself, making sure to leave yourself ample time for things like that. If you're in an asynchronous environment, providing resources is particularly important because you're not right there to guide your students through the process of using the tool. John, are you getting ready to say something?
Yeah, so I was going to say, I think it's really important to kind of couple considerations on here. Really allowing time, and that's one of the things I love the idea of remote learning because students can really have time to dig in and play around with an app. And sometimes in school, we just don't really have, the time in the day to just give them that time to sandbox. But it will make a big difference because it's a process to work through and figure those things out. And if you can give them those resources so they can figure an app out, kids are, there's so much more, adept at watching YouTube videos and using that to guide their learning. And it's really nice to see when kids, they get stuck on something. If they have those resources, openly available, then they're definitely able to do that. And I think that's one of the things about kind of this generation. There are some misconceptions we sometimes make about technology proficiency of young people, but that ability to really work your way through a problem is definitely something many of them have if the resources are there and available. I think kind of along those lines, if you're rolling out something for the first time, try not to be too heavy on the content for the early stages, because then for students, it's going to be heavy content and heavy tech learning. So the combination of those two, I've seen many students, struggle because they're learning an app for the first time and they're, maybe not able to know all of the parts and pieces of how that works. And then there's content that they're trying to digest and to put into, a movie or something like that they're creating. The providing examples and exemplars. I taught podcasting for a number of years. And one of the things that this activity always worked was I had examples of other podcasts that students of mine had previously created, and not shocking for those of you who work at the middle level or high school level, but kids love to be very critical of other students' work or whatever. So they weren't hurting the feelings of anybody in the room. They didn't know who the students were. So it was just nice to have those examples and them to be thinking really critically. And for podcasting, what I liked about that is it gave them that time to think like, oh, that sounds bad because of X, Y, and Z. And then hopefully they wouldn't make those same mistakes. And if you have some sort of technology that you use over and over again with new groups of students, sometimes you'll see those same mistakes and you can address those accordingly. So it's really important to set them up to succeed. And I think giving them those examples that they can go in and critique will help them really think carefully about their own thing that they're going to be creating. And also part of that is if they're able to share those with their peers, they'll want to be putting forward, work that's good that people will think is good, and they can also have opportunities to give feedback to each other on if something is, maybe this needs a little attention or you should fix this. And sometimes students they'll know how to help students fix something, like, oh, I can show you how to do transitions from one thing to another, and that would look really cool if you did that. And along that line, if you're ever able to bring in experts, so like I was saying, doing podcasts, bringing in somebody from, radio or broadcasting or production, that type of thing would be really helpful. I saw at an elementary school in Saco, they brought in Erwin Gratz, who does the morning news on Maine Public Radio, to come in and talk with students about recording themselves talking about stuff that they had researched. And it was so cool. And obviously what he does and what they do are, very far apart in some ways, but very similar in other ways. And it was just great to have that opportunity. And I think in a remote learning environment, especially now that everybody's got on Zoom or Google Meets or whatever, I'm hoping that there'll be more comfort level from those experts that people can bring them into their classrooms more often. And then obviously within your school, you might have specialists. So if you're doing different projects, if you have a technology integrationist, bringing them in to be part of this process. If you have literacy coaches, math coaches, bringing those type of people in. If you have, your phys ed, health, music, all of those type of people, if you can bring them into the process in some form, then that, it's almost the more the merrier in that case. So I think those are a couple key considerations to be kind of making if you're integrating technology and trying to make that work. And then Emma, I will let you take over the evaluating technology tools piece.
Okay, so one of the things that I think often gets overlooked when it comes to technology integration is kind of rounding back around to that reflection and evaluation piece. You chose a tool, you used it, how did it go? And that, I think, is something that we often kind of gets lost in the mix because we're too busy trying to, meet the need versus, having all that time for processing and reflection. So anytime that we can build those types of things into this process of selecting and integrating, you'll kind of be able to have those built-in reflections as you move forward. And so some considerations to kind of be making as you're evaluating tools are, proven effectiveness. Does it have a good reputation? I saw a question in the chat earlier about if an app has good stars, if it has 4 stars on the App Store, is that, how trustworthy is that? And that is definitely a factor. You can look at, how many people rated it and what did they rate it. If something has 4 stars, that at first appearance could be good, but if only 2 people have rated it, then that doesn't span very far. So looking at how many people have rated it, what they've rated it, that kind of the brand, like John was mentioning earlier, kind of keeping some of those things in mind. If it was produced by Microsoft or Google, chances are it's probably not going anywhere anytime soon. You know, those kinds of things are really good to keep in mind when you're evaluating if something is going to be effective or not, or if it was effective or not. Accessibility and ease of use. Those are some of the things that we kind of are constantly rounding back to with the remote learning piece. Having things be easy to use, easy to access, easy to understand. All those things become really imperative in this setting. Language and culture, explore the tools that you're using and see if they provide any options for learners who are engaging with it, you know, with a different language. One thing that we've kind of learned is we had to recently switch from Google Forms to Microsoft Forms. And one of the things that I was happy about is that Microsoft Form actually offers you the ability to use up to 10 different languages for their form. So that was an easy thing. I just pulled up, you know, the top 10 languages spoken in Maine and added that so that the form is now multilingual, you know, in options. So that increased accessibility and ease of use for those folks who English is not their first language. And that was an easy thing to do as well, just kind of exploring the app and seeing if it had that ability or not. Affordability and onboarding. How complicated will it be to get your class onto the tool? Is it free? You know, if it's not free, where is the price wall? Because a lot of times you'll get some free features, but sometimes it's the ones that matter that are behind the paywall. I've definitely gone through the entire sign up, setup process, creating in a thing, and then you go and you hit present and they're like, oh yeah, you want to present this? Then now you got to give me money. So kind of knowing if there is a paywall, where that is, so that you don't put all this time and effort into something that you ultimately either can't deliver because you hit the paywall, or you have to now pay money in order to deliver it. So keeping some of those things in mind as you're evaluating your tools, those are good considerations to make as to whether or not you would use a tool again, or if it was effective for the purposes that you need. There are some tools that you would just want to pay for if you're going to use it, like a conference management tool. Those are really complex, like, gosh, I can't remember the phrasing that you used earlier, John, but that whole idea of like, if it's almost too good to be true, generally there's probably a paywall in there somewhere. If it does have that functionality and it's not too good to be true, then that's where the little hitch comes in, is usually you'll hit something like that.
Yeah, be careful if somebody's saying they have a silver bullet.
Right. Yes, there's usually a catch somewhere. Almost
Yes.
always. Nothing comes for free, right?
Yep.
Quality content, logical flow, those are kind of play into the ease of use. You know, you want to make sure that the information that you're delivering is high quality and that there is a logical progression for how the user is going to move through it, whether it's a Google Classroom or a slide or whatever it is. Just making sure that there is that logical flow going on will help with users, and it will ultimately help your experience because you'll have to provide less support. If a program or an app or a tool is designed with these things in mind, then you will have to do less supporting on your end. So they're definitely things that you'll want to keep in mind as you move forward. Supports and longevity, those are things that John kind of definitely covered at the beginning, talking about when you're selecting. If you do a high quality selection process, and the evaluation process just becomes more of a reflection. So these are kind of things that I want to say this would be like a reflection, but you would evaluate it after you've selected it to see if these things held up in your selection process, kind of deal, almost like a system of checks and balances. And then the last one just being privacy and security, the whole FERPA, SIPA, COPA thing, all those different, the alphabet soup acronyms, trying to make sure that you are being aware of what information they're going to have and what they're going to be doing with it. And then one of the biggest things I think that we've emphasized in several sessions is the idea to include students in this process, include them in the evaluation, include them in the selection process if it makes sense. Ask them how it went, poll them, give them an exit survey when you try something new. I think students are generally brutally honest, and so kind of asking them how it went for them, you might get more feedback than you're intending, but you'll still kind of get a really good idea of how it went for everyone. And these are there's two resources here. One is just kind of some criteria that you could use for evaluating tools. And I also have a rubric here because I know that some people they process well that way, seeing things in a rubric. So if it works, I'm gonna just launch the rubric so you can kind of see what it looks like.
I think one of the things to keep in mind is if you're not in a classroom working with those students, this is something we kind of saw at the MLTI student conference recently, is it can be difficult to, see if a student is like struggling or make a mistake. You don't have that ability to walk around and kind of watch what people are doing. So I think having some checks in place so you can be checking in with students along the way can be helpful in terms of, as opposed to near the end and looking back, did that go well or not?
So this is the rubric. This is free to be used. It's Creative Commons licensed. So you can, if this is something that interests you, feel free to use it and share it. But this kind of just gives you some basic categories and then some descriptors of whether or not it meets it or does not meet. And so this can be really helpful if you're trying to I like to use these types of things in the selection process and then just revisit it in the evaluation process. So I might reference a rubric like this if I'm trying to determine if a tool is worth selecting and integrating. So you can certainly use this in like a backwards, you can either do top down or down to top. Either way works and would be just as effective. So definitely keep some of these things in mind as you're selecting your tools, and then kind of feel free to revisit these concepts when you're reflecting on the process of how things went. And so we've been trying to wrap our sessions up with a good old-fashioned checklist of kind of the big ideas that we've talked about in our session. We know that we cover a lot of information in a very short period of time, which is one of the reasons that we like to include so many links and resources within the slide deck and send that out, is because we know that you can't possibly absorb all of this in one session. So giving you, the opportunity to dig in at a later date, we feel is often helpful. So some of the things to be keeping in mind when selecting, integrating, and evaluating your technology tools. And these are to be very thoughtful and purposeful when you're selecting apps. The more in-depth research and thought that you put into the selection process, the easier the integration, the easier the evaluation will be. And that kind of plays to the idea of investing time early so that you can avoid issues later. And by doing all of those things, you're setting your students up for success. You've kind of put in the supports, you've done the experimentation ahead of time, you've kind of worked out any of the kinks before you've dropped them into the environment, depending on how steep the learning curve is. I think that's where it's almost an equation to determine student success, right? Cognitive load and how new is the tool, what's the learning curve of the tool, all those things kind of equal the level of success. Addressing problems as they arise. When a problem comes up, don't just push it to the side. Try to mitigate that as soon as possible. I think in a remote learning environment, that's extremely critical due to the isolated nature that students are in. Kind of any problems that come up, the quicker they can be dealt with, the less fallout afterwards. And taking time to evaluate and reflect on the integration piece. How did it go? How did your students react? Were they engaged? How did it make things easier for you to integrate this piece after you did the development and testing process? Because obviously that will take some time no matter kind of how you're doing things, but reflecting on the integration piece and wondering like if it kind of reached which level of the SAMR model it's in, and if it could be leveled up, or if it's in a good place where it is, and just kind of some of those considerations are good as you're moving into the integration piece. And so we've got just under 5 minutes left. So I kind of just want to open things up to see if people have questions. I see that there's some stuff in the chat. I'm trying to pull that up. terribly difficult to get to the chat when you're sharing screens on multiple screens. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions?
So with these sessions, we have been sending out the slide decks to people that have registered for the sessions. So should be emailing those out. So I'm not sure, Emma, if you hadn't emailed out the one from yesterday yet or not. But
I have not yet. I have the email all typed up. I just have to populate the email addresses. So
yeah.
Probably like 5 minutes after this session is over, yesterday's will come through, and then I'll get today's out today.
Pull the registration. Yep. It's a process.
Yes, definitely. Just checking back through the chat, making sure there wasn't anything that we missed. I know that there was a question I'm not sure got answered at the beginning, kind of asking about vetting tools and like kind of where the onus is for that, whether it's in the tech department or if it's on the teacher's side of things. And I think that the answer to that would be both. Because there are some apps where, you know, if it's on your whitelist for your school, then chances are you really don't need to do a whole lot of vetting for that, because the district has kind of said, yes, this is an approved, you know, tool to be using. But then there are some tools, like if it's not a commonly used tool, if it's not supported by your tech department, then if it's something that you want to use independently as a teacher, then you might want to do some vetting on your own, because chances are it hasn't been done for you by the tech department.
Yeah. And some schools and some districts have, you know, a group of people that work through and vet those apps, especially with paid apps. I think that's where it, you know, is really important to really look at, because for the sake of consistency, if you're investing the money in an app that you're going to make available for a large percentage of your students, you want to make sure that everybody's kind of on board with using that and not using some other tool. So I think that's something to be kind of thinking about. And if your school doesn't have a process, you know, maybe suggest that you adopt one. So the link to the form is in the chat. So if people want to access that there.
Yep, and you complete the form, and once you hit submit on the form, just for anyone who might not be familiar, you'll get a URL link to the survey, the PD certificate, and then you can fill in your name at the bottom of that screen. It'll populate in the certificate, and you can print or save it. And another question that was asked that's probably worth mentioning to the group is just we will have more sessions next week. They are not on the website yet. We're going through a very untimely switch in PD calendars where events are listed. So if you don't see it by Friday, it should be in there by Monday. But I will be adding them to the list today. So it'll just be a matter of it trickling through the channels before it'll be on the website. But they will be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday again next week at 11. And then the help sessions Tuesday and Thursday at 3.
And if you happen to miss any of the remote learning 101, you know, if you miss one of them, I think we've tried to set them up so even if you're out of sequence, you know, it's not going to be totally lost in the woods. But we'll make those recordings available so people can go back and refer to those, and you still can get the certificate of contact hour. So
yep, and I uploaded all of last week's videos yesterday, so they should be on the website like as soon as today. But definitely by the end of the week.
Yep. So I think some of these are really good if your districts are starting to have some of those conversations around these parts and pieces. It does seem kind of funny. Like, I think some of this is like, shouldn't we have been talking about this back in March? And we've one of the points we've been trying to make is that we're talking about a more ideal remote learning situation and not a crisis learning situation, as we just went through over the past couple months. So I think that's definitely a time to be reflecting on what were the successes from this previous time, and, you know, making some decisions accordingly, and hopefully planning over the summer. And no matter what happens next school year, these kind of tools and concepts can all be useful, and maybe we'll just be saying goodbye to snow days for the future. Are you grabbing the address, Emma, for the sessions? Thank you.
So this is where they will be. I'm just going to emphasize that because I don't see them here yet. But once the person who uploads them to the website gets a chance to put them on there, they will show up here, I believe.
And they will show up in YouTube before that. So it's kind
yeah,
of,
they're already in YouTube, John, actually. Thank you. That's
So-
perfect. Let me drop that in real quick.
so go to YouTube and hit that subscribe button and be kept up on all the DOE content specialist videos that we're making.
Right, yes, as they come in too. That's definitely the quickest way to get them. Okay, there we go. I was gonna say there are 2 DOE YouTube accounts, which has not been helpful. But all right, there is the YouTube page. Feel free to subscribe. Like John said, the videos show up there first. So if you're looking to kind of jump on them as soon as they get posted, then that's a good place to start. Alrighty, everyone have a fantastic afternoon, and we will be here again tomorrow at 11.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.